Good morning, everybody. This is Jerry, and good afternoon for those of us in Munich. There's at least one, or Germany. I'm not sure where the ambassador is. We are delighted to welcome you to, I think, our first event of calendar year 2021, although the real world has presented us with a series of endlessly interesting real events as well. So this is a busy time. I'm really delighted to introduce Ambassador Wolfgang Ischinger, who is the chairman of the Munich Security Conference. And I may have this wrong, but as I recall, it was at the Munich Security Conference last year that former Vice President, pre-candidate Joe Biden announced to the world, the United States will be back. And those of us who share a commitment to U.S. global leadership, to U.S. values, to democracy, and so forth, are delighted that this has come to pass, and indeed the United States will be reassuming a position of leadership. The fact that he said it in Munich, I think, is important and significant. Ambassador Ischinger has had a long diplomatic career. Kimberly's going to introduce him in a somewhat more detail, but he's an extraordinarily well-known and influential voice in both transatlantic relations and specifically U.S.-German relations. I also want to introduce somebody who doesn't really need introduction. She is so well known to us, Kimberly Marteau Emerson, who's a longtime member of the Pacific Council and a longtime friend of the Pacific Council. She and husband John, our former ambassador to Germany, John's a member of our board, are always available to share their wisdom, their counsel with us. We visited Kimberly and John in Berlin. We made an inspection tour, and they were doing a great job. And we're happy to have them back. Kimberly is a national member of the Board of Human Rights Watch, which is a particularly important organization. They have just issued their annual report, which I would commend to all of you. She is writing a book, and it was actually being written in Berlin in the heat of the pandemic. So maybe our next book event will be, Kimberly, with your book. In any case, I want to thank you both for doing this. I want to welcome our audience. Let us hope that 2021 is going to be a healthier year for those of us in the world of geopolitics. It already is, and it will be. So my thanks to all of you.
Thank you, Jerry. And I want to welcome all of you and say good morning. And I also want to especially welcome Ambassador Wolfgang Ischinger, a friend for many years now. In fact, when John and I were posted to Germany and arrived in August 2013, we were given a very short list of it was wise men, but people that we had to sit down with, we were advised must meet in our first month there. And I think, Wolfgang, dinner with you and Jutta, his esteemed spouse, who is also a journalist and author, was one of the first dinners we had, and you basically gave us the lay of the land. So let me now have the honor to introduce you more formally. For the past 12 years, Ambassador Ischinger has been the chairman of the Munich Security Conference, the world's largest gathering on international security policy, and it's attended by heads of states, ministers, legislators, leading personalities of international and non-governmental organizations, business, media, academia, and civil society. In February of every year, it is the place to be if you are involved in international security policy. Unfortunately, this year it will not take place in February, but I know you're aiming for a later date. Anyway, Ambassador Ischinger joined the Foreign Service in Germany in 1975, where he built his expertise as a transatlanticist. Among the highlights of his illustrious career, the ambassador led the German delegations during the Bosnian peace negotiations in Dayton, Ohio in 1995. And I point that out and remember them well because After their signing as a senior political appointee at the US Information Agency, I was assigned to the White House to run the public campaign in the US to get Congress to vote to put troops on the ground in Bosnia. So I don't know if you knew that. It's always fun to read someone's bio. Meanwhile, the ambassador led the negotiations on the NATO-Russia Founding Act in 1996 and 97, and during the Kosovo crisis in 1998 and 99. He has served as Deputy Foreign Minister of the German Federal Foreign Office and as German Ambassador to the United States and then to the UK in the early 2000s. John and I had been in Berlin 6 months when Russia annexed Crimea and began the conflict in eastern Ukraine. That year, 2014, Ambassador Ischinger was appointed as special representative of the OSCE in the Ukraine crisis. In 2015, he chaired an OSCE mandated panel, which was tasked with providing advice on how to build a more resilient European security architecture. The list of Ambassador Ischinger's honors and awards is long and deserved. Among them, he has received the German Bundesverdienstkreuz, the Leo Baeck Medal awarded by the Leo Baeck Institute in New York, the Manfred Wöhner Medal, and the prestigious Nunn-Luger Award for promoting nuclear security. He is also commander of the French Legion of Honor. So basically, moss never grows under the ambassador's feet. It would be an understatement to say that Ambassador Ischinger has had plenty of experiences and accumulated decades of wisdom, which have served as a foundation for his new book, A World in Danger. It's an excellent read and highly relevant, especially for those wanting to understand the European perspective on why we are where we are today, with an increase in emboldened autocrats, rising populist leaders and movements, and democracy and rule of law on a cliff's edge in the West and other parts of the world. Ambassador Ischinger, and may I call you Wolfgang, we're so grateful to have you join us here at the Pacific Council on International Policy to discuss your book and your thoughts on a number of topics. So let me start. As we get to the meat of your book, of course, the elephant in the room is the armed insurrection at the US Capitol last Wednesday, and today's looming and fully expected second impeachment vote of Donald J. Trump in the House of Representatives. Your thesis for A World in Danger is based in part on the damage Donald Trump has done to the liberal order. In the first chapter you wrote, none of these many decision makers shook up and unsettled the world like President Trump has since taking office in January 2017. The entire established liberal world order is threatening to give way, and nothing is the way it was before. So this is a two-part question. First, as a transatlanticist and a former German ambassador to the United States, who's managed through plenty of crises, including on day one of your posting in Washington, D.C., which happened to be September 11th, 2001. My first question is, how is Europe, in particular Germany, viewing the US at this time, and how might it react going forward? And second, how might the new administration of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris impact your thesis for A World in Danger? Over to you.
Thank you, Kimberly. Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be with you on this program today. I wish I could do this with you in person on the West Coast. You were such gracious hosts when a couple of years ago, my family and I came through California. And I hope that we can do that again. Of course, certainly the Munich conference on our side of the Atlantic with, as always, a significant participation of the US Congress and of the future administration. And hopefully many, many visits by decision makers from our side of the Atlantic to Washington, D.C. So my response to your question is this. First of all, let me say that when I had to make a decision about the title of this book, which of course came out originally in German, some people questioned the wisdom of speaking about a world in danger. Welt in Gefahr is the German title. It's the exact, same concept. as world in danger. Some people said, isn't that going a little too far? We're actually living at peace, and what's wrong? Why do you get so excited? As a matter of fact, if I had to make the title decision again now, at the beginning of 2021, I would probably argue in favor of world in great danger, not less. Um, and here's my scenario. And as a diplomat, I learned early on that you should always start with the good news. So I will start with the good news. The good news is, and that's my response to at least one part of your question, I think we're going to be facing, beginning on January 21, in other words, a week from now or so, a huge opportunity for the West, for the transatlantic community, for the United States itself, for American society, to come together again and to recommit ourselves jointly to the values and to the principles and to the objectives which have kept us busy, but also have kept us safe for the last 70 years, which is not a small accomplishment. The problem, though, and that's given the fact that we are going to have a president who is extremely well known in Europe. I'm not sure whether our audience, our participants, would be aware of the fact that Joe Biden, as a newly elected member of Congress, participated in the Munich Security Conference, which was then called the Wehrkunde meeting. We changed the name some 10 or 15 years ago, but he first participated, believe it or not, in 1980. In 1980, that's more than 40 years ago today. I cannot think of any current international decision maker who participated in Munich in 1980. The only one that I could think of, but he unfortunately left us a couple of years ago, would be John McCain. That was probably also Chancellor Helmut Kohl of Germany, but he has passed away. So Joe Biden is a man of such enormous experience in dealing with transatlantic issues that I would go as far as calling him a walking confidence building measure. And that's, of course, that's the positive part. That's the optimistic assumption, the optimistic perspective going forward with people like Tony Blinken and the Vice President Kamala Harris and Bill Burns as the CIA director. These are all people we know in Europe and we trust. And one of the arguments which I've tried to advance in my book is that the essence of working together in international relations is really the 3 T's, as I call it. The 3 T's is truth, trust, and transparency. If you can maintain these 3 principles, you're going to be in good shape. Unfortunately, these 3 principles were violated, were lost to some extent, including in the transatlantic relationship. And that brings me, and I'll just add 2 very brief remarks. This brings me to the sort of less positive part of our outlook. I am afraid that after so many certainties have sort of flown out the window, the United States as the permanent guarantor of European security, the doubt has been created by Donald Trump, right? The ever closer union of the European integration project, that certainty is gone because the United Kingdom just left us on the 1st of January, just 12 days ago. So Europe has a problem, the EU has a problem, and we are not quite sure yet, I would assume, whether we can agree across the Atlantic on how exactly to deal with the growing challenge that China presents to us on human rights. I know that's your most important issue, the one that you've been dealing with so intensely for so many years. But it's also, of course, about strategic issues. It's about questions of arms control. It's about questions of trade and investment and reciprocity and level playing field in our business relationships with China and other partners in Asia. In other words, there is ahead of us on both sides of the Atlantic a huge agenda, an enormous challenge. My recommendation, my advice to decision makers on the European side has been for these last several weeks, many weeks since the result of the US election became known, was let's not wait until Joe Biden comes to us and will make everything right again, because he can't do that on his own. We will need to make an offer. We will need to go to Washington and offer areas where the United States and Europe can both, benefit. So we need a proactive approach to the transatlantic relationship. We must not just sit there and wait for the Biden administration to make Europe happy again. That would be totally underestimating the challenge that we're facing today. So I think this year, which just begun, is going to be, in terms of international security and the transatlantic relationship, one of the most important ones, probably a historic year. When we look back at it 10 years from now, a historic year, but also an extremely dangerous and challenging year, because I would not be surprised if people like Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin and others would seek to check and test the resilience of this incoming administration. Does President Biden have the United States, the people of the United States behind him? Or are there going to be more than 70 million who will continue to consider his election, the result of manipulation? I think that the challenge for your future administration is huge, and we should therefore try to be helpful and cooperative and try to agree on as many areas, whether it's defense or trade or technology or cyber, on as many areas where both the United States and the European allies can benefit and can show that we are stronger together. That's actually something that we've been believing in for the last 60 years, and it was always a good idea.
So thank you for that, which actually provokes a follow-up question for me about China, because there's clearly a bipartisan consensus in the United States on getting tough on China. And one of the big differences between Trump and Biden is that President-elect Biden has clearly signaled that he wants to work with our allies on a common approach. But just recently, post-US election, the EU and China concluded a massive investment deal. And it seems like and they did it after Biden was elected. And it seems like the EU is making a statement, maybe a not so aligned or coordinated one, about what it sees as its own priorities. I'm just curious why the EU needed to push ahead post-US election to conclude a deal that may tie its hands on a values-focused, coordinated approach to a country that is seriously challenging the global liberal order. Seems like that's a country that we could be working together on approaching.
Absolutely, Kimberly. I think it's a very important question. And here is a brief answer to that. First, let me insist that all of the European leaders that I know of, including Ursula von der Leyen at the presidency of the European Commission, certainly including German leaders and others, we are interested in creating the closest possible coordination mechanism on China with the United States. That's the objective, and that stands. The investment agreement, which was recently, the negotiation of which was recently concluded, it's not a done deal, because an investment treaty negotiated by the EU Commission needs to be ratified, among other things, by the European Parliament. And believe me, there are just as many members of the European Parliament as there are members in the US Congress who are proposing a much tougher on human rights, on the Uyghur question, on Hong Kong, and so many other issues, who are suggesting a much tougher approach to China. So the negotiation has been concluded. By the way, it has taken 7 years. It was not a rushed thing, between the US election and the inauguration of Joe Biden. Some commentators made it sound like that. That's not the fact. The fact is it took 7 years to negotiate it, and we will see to what extent our parliaments will want to change the text, reject it. Remember what happened to TTIP when we negotiated a few years ago a transatlantic trade and investment and cooperation deal. It failed. It was rejected by parliamentarians who didn't like chlorinated chicken from the United States and all, et cetera, et cetera. And I expect a wide-ranging discussion in European parliaments, in the EU Parliament, and in capitals about the wisdom of the text and of the agreement and of the future. That is one thing. I would be the first to agree that it was probably not a great idea, diplomatically speaking, to announce the end of the negotiation during the transition period between the US election and the inauguration. That was probably not a great idea, but the two things really have little to do with each other, and there will be a wide expectation and willingness by Europe in our own interest to coordinate with the United States, because we know that the EU has little leverage in Beijing on its own. It will have enormous leverage if it can come to Beijing together, or at least in a coordinated fashion with the United States. That would be my brief answer to that China issue.
Thank you. So in other words, optics matter.
Absolutely, especially in diplomacy, not only in diplomacy.
Exactly. Exactly. By the way, I just wanted to say to our audience, please put your questions in the Q&A if you have them, because in about 5 to 10 minutes, we're going to be turning to your questions for Ambassador Ischinger. And, I'm sure you have many. There are so many areas to cover. I think I wrote out about 20 questions when I was going over what I wanted to ask you. And I guess, I agree with you. There are still areas, there are areas of common opportunity together. And you mentioned some of them where we could work together with Germany, such as trade or on the nuclear threat, the climate area, potentially refugees. Trump really had a thorn in his side, and it began with the Obama administration, really, over the NATO budget. And I thought that we heard so much about, Germany is not making its 2%. And frankly, again, it did, President Obama really also wanted Germany to step up in its defense spending. And it has remained a little bit of an area of controversy between and disagreement between Germany and the United States. I know Germany has promised and committed to reach that 2% of its GDP towards defense spending by 2024. And I wanted to see what your thoughts are on that. Do you think it's going to make it? Is this a valid position for the United States to have?
Well, thank you, Kimberly. On this defense burden sharing issue, let me recall that when I served in the German embassy at the end of the 1970s, beginning of the 1980s, this was the last year of Jimmy Carter and the first 2 years of Ronald Reagan, I wrote reports home to the German government then sitting in Bonn still about the idea that we should meet the 3% goal. This was during the Cold War, and we, the Germans, were actually doing rather well. We had many, many hundreds, if not thousands of tanks, and Germany was extremely militarized, etc. It is not easy for Americans, as I know from many, many conversations, to understand what exactly happened in Germany after unification. What happened in Germany after unification is that our political leaders on both sides of the aisle, as you would say, told the German voter, paradise has now started. We are surrounded now only by friends. The Soviet army is gone. And it was gone. And even Poland, which was part of which was heavily occupied by by Soviet forces, even Poland was now about to become a member of NATO and is a member of NATO now. So we're only surrounded by friends. So why the hell would we want to spend a lot of money on defense? We have all these friends around us. That was a thought, a philosophy, which attracted the voters, made them happy, and made them think that the time when we needed a strong military is really over. It has taken, I think, too many years for German politicians to start reminding our voters that we don't live on an island. And that, as we have learned in recent years, if there is an Islamic fundamentalist terrorist organization in a place called Mali, which most people can't even find on a map, we need to be aware of the fact that that terrorist threat can easily come across the Mediterranean and create havoc in Europe. In other words, that the time is not over for us in Europe to have a capacity to defend ourselves, to defend our borders, to defend our partners, and to have NATO. So as a result of this long time that it took for Germans to wake up, we regretfully still have in our current coalition government, as you know very well, one party, the Social Democratic Party, which will run in this upcoming coming election this fall, which will run on a kind of not zero defense budget, but low defense budget, pacifist kind of ticket. Chancellor Merkel and her followers, I think, would have liked very much to implement the promise that we made ourselves with all our partners in 2014. You were in Berlin at the time when the Wales NATO summit happened, and we committed ourselves to the 2%. I am ready and willing to criticize my own government for not having been able to get enough votes in our parliament to move up to the 2% more rapidly. I think there is a willingness to do that. Let's see whether the coalition situation after the election will be better. I am convinced that the world has become far more risky. Threats in the Mediterranean, in the Middle East, in Eastern Europe. Think of Ukraine, think of Russian behavior in places like Georgia and Syria and elsewhere. We need to be able to do more, even if the Biden administration will recommit themselves to being the leader of NATO and reassuring Europeans that the nuclear umbrella will not be put in question. But our response to that should be, thank you very much, President Biden, and we will move up and do our part of the job and come up with the 2% as quickly as our parliaments will allow us to do that. So I'm ready to criticize our own, laggard behavior over these last few years. We've had a hard time.
Well, it feels like it started to change. Maybe it was on the Day of Unification in 2013. I think that was when President Gauck gave that speech at the Day of Unity and kind of threw down the gauntlet to Germany. So, it's headed in the right direction from what we can see. But thank you for your comments, and I hope that you can help influence your government in going forward. I see, okay, it's a little bit after the half hour here, and I do see we have a couple of questions in the queue. I've got plenty of backup questions should we run out of audience ones, but I feel like I do want to give the audience a chance to ask you them. And the first question I have comes from Art Silbergeld, who is a friend who also is involved in Human Rights Watch here. Mm-hmm. And he asked, what is the danger to Germany and Europe that Germany has found its military infested with pro-Nazi supporters? What is Germany doing to control this, and how is the country managing the international relations image in the steps it is taking?
Okay, thanks. Interesting question. Yes, we have had, unfortunately, we have had to discover that there were in the ranks and file of our military an unacceptable number of individuals who were propagating or adhering to right-wing ideology. I'm glad to say that this government, the current German government, has taken very drastic measures to make sure that these people are not going to continue serving in our military. This went as far as the Defense Minister Annegret Kramp-Karrenbauer, whom you know well, issuing a public threat that she would close down the unit which you would call the special forces, especially highly trained army units for special operations. And there were a number of people identified with these right-wing inclinations, and she threatened to close down the whole very, very large unit. There's now a reform process going on, and I think we're on top of that. And I do not believe, and that would be my message to the person who asked the question, I do not believe that this is going to be a continuing serious challenge for us. What I do believe, and I don't want to, make things look less problematic than they are. What I do believe is that we are unfortunately facing the same kind of phenomena you've been facing in the United States. This so-called QAnon,
QAnon
movement, which many of us, certainly I thought, is an American phenomenon. They're showing up all over the place in Europe, propagating right-wing conspiracy theories. In other words, on that issue, dealing with right-wing extremism, certainly also left-wing extremism, but especially in recent days, right-wing extremism is a problem that will lend itself very well to joint thinking about the best way of de-radicalizing people and eradicating the propagation of fake news and manipulated information, etc. That is a new challenge which I would not have believed would exist in our country if you had asked me 2 or 3 years ago. It's a relatively recent phenomenon and one that requires a lot of attention.
Yeah, we could have a whole side conversation on like social media platforms and their responsibilities, but thank you. And I think some of us did see some of those protests taking place in Berlin and in front of the parliament there.
You know, let me, sorry for interrupting you, but just to remind our listeners, our participants, we had only a few months ago, the end of last year, we had an incident where some, I would call them crazy protesters, were very close of breaking into the German Reichstag, our parliament. In other words, there's a lot of sympathy in Berlin and you know, relief that this storming of the capital has not led to even greater carnage and victims, etc. We had an event which came very, very close to a bunch of crazy people entering our parliament and creating havoc and threatening members of our parliament with physical injury.
So it is a threat to the rule of law in a lot of the West. So I feel I do want to move on to a couple of other questions. We could have an hour conversation about the threats to democracy right now, but there's also a few other things that have happened. And from Abe Lobenthal, who is one of our founding members of the Pacific Council and a thought leader on international policy. In its final months and weeks, the Trump administration has doubled down on a hardline policy supporting the Netanyahu government in Israel and confronting Cuba and Venezuela in the Americas. Can you comment on how Europe views these moves, and can and will Europe and Germany help Biden reverse them?
Okay, well, let me make a general remark. I think that as the Biden administration takes over in just a few days, I know that it takes always some time for an incoming administration to get their act together, to get their people not only nominated, but approved by the Senate, et cetera. So things will take some time. But I think there are a number of low-hanging fruit in terms of transatlantic cooperation. One expectation that many in Europe have is that the Biden administration will review and change US policy on a number of issues, including in particular, and that is in terms of popular attention, probably the issue numero uno, so to speak, that's climate. If the Biden administration comes out quickly announcing that they will return to the fold of the Paris Climate Accord, you will have Europe, applauding from right wing through right conservatives, leftist conservatives to the left wing. Everybody will applaud the United States for doing more and becoming a leader again on climate. The same is true for the kinds of Obama or earlier decisions on foreign policy, which the Trump administration has now tried to reverse, including, of course, on Cuba, and certainly also with respect to the situation of the Palestinians. I'm full of admiration for the achievement that it was possible to help Israel be recognized now by an increasing number of Arab countries. That's good. But I don't see much progress on the situation in the Gaza Strip or in the West Bank. So how are we going to get our act together again, we as the Western community, to try to advance a peace settlement, which has been so hard to reach, which we've been trying to move forward now for the last 40 years, and it still hasn't happened. In other words, there is a huge foreign policy agenda where Europe is totally prepared and willing to work with the incoming administration in the Middle East on climate, on terrorism, on Iran. We believe that the stepping away by the Trump administration from the Iran nuclear deal, from the JCPOA, has actually not led so far to a lesser danger coming from Iran. It has, on the contrary, led to the resumption of enrichment by the Iranian authorities. In other words, there is an urgent need for us all to review the situation, hopefully in cooperation with Israel, which is the one that the target of some of these Iranian radical mullahs. But I think the way to move forward, and I think that is also the conviction of Joe Biden and John Kerry, with whom I've had many discussions about this, is we need to try to resume a diplomatic effort. And I don't see any easy military solution to the Iranian challenge. So let's go back to the diplomatic drawing board and let's do it together.
Yeah, I think you'll find a listening ear here and an active listening ear. I think the Biden administration will want to work with Europeans on that. We have a question from Lorraine Schneider. In the face of many crises, and this is related to a question I wanted to ask you, financial, immigration, pandemic, Chancellor Merkel has contributed so much to stability in Germany and across the EU over the past 15 years. How do you foresee Germany's leadership on the international stage change post-elections this year? And of course, my question was going to be, who are you betting on? But I think this question is something that our audience would really like to hear.
Right. First of all, the good news is that politically speaking, Germany is actually in pretty good shape, regardless of whether you would prefer, Friedrich Merz or Minister President Laschet to be the next chancellor or chairperson of the party. They are all of them, all the current candidates are committed to maintaining the kind of fundamental continuity that has been a characteristic of German foreign policy for so long. They're all pro-EU, they're all pro-NATO. So the one thing where I would bet that I'm right is don't expect a disruptive result of the German elections. We will have a lot of continuity. That's good. Now, just to contrast this, our neighboring country, France, has a much bigger issue. Emmanuel Macron will be up for his election, a little more than a year and a half from now. He will have as an opponent, among others, Marine Le Pen from the right wing. And all hell would break loose, I think, in Europe, if Marine Le Pen, and she came close to doing that the last time, if Marine Le Pen were to beat Emmanuel Macron. So for the French, there are really significant threats of disruption in their election process, which is why for Emmanuel Macron, the challenge of presenting himself as a convincing global leader who can come up with new ideas every week or so, that challenge is much greater for him than for these German candidates who don't really have a fundamental challenge at this time. So I don't get too excited about the choice that we're going to have to make.
Mm.
I think whoever wins the post, whoever is going to be elected chancellor, will find out that it's very hard to fit into these very large shoes, which Angela Merkel will leave behind. I mean, I think her shoe size is probably a small shoe size, but her political shoes are very large. After 16 years, it will make quite a difference for a new and probably mostly inexperienced German chancellor to sit at the European table or to come to the NATO summit. That will be different, and whoever is going to be the next chancellor will have a challenge to demonstrate that within a year or so he can play the kind of role that Angela Merkel has been able to play in terms of promoting German policies and German interests. So yes,
Yeah,
for Germany, it's going
yeah.
to be an important year.
And will there'll be a different coalition, do you think?
I think
Will there
so.
be a green-black coalition, a Green Party partner?
That's what most analysts predict. It is possible that we would have a conservative coalition with the Greens. It is also possible that we would have a kind of a tripartite coalition between the CDU, Chancellor Merkel's party, and the Liberal, the Free Democrats, and the Greens. What I think is not going to happen, at least I hope it's not going to happen, is a kind of left coalition. I think the most probable outcome would be that we would have a CDU chancellor, probably either Friedrich Merz or Minister President Laschet, or possibly the Minister President of Bavaria, Söder, who has so far declined to run because he's continued saying, my place is in Munich. But you know how it is in politics. These things are sometimes not permanent, these types of statements. So whoever is going to lead the country will have to govern with what will probably a complicated kind of coalition system. We used to have, until maybe 15 years ago, we used to have essentially three parties, not like the United States, two. We used to have three. Now we have six. And the situation is such that it's almost impossible to form a government with less than three partners. And of course, making two other partners permanently happy in such a coalition government is not a small task. So I would not want to be chancellor in this next government. It's going to be hard work.
And we should, and just, quick answer, we should probably have a sense of who that is sooner rather than later because of the party convention coming up in early this year. No, usually the leader of the party tends to be the person who is put on the ticket as chancellor.
We will know. We will probably not be 100% certain, but we will know a lot more by next Sunday when the CDU has had their party congress and when they will have elected their next chairperson. And the probability is that next chairperson is probably going to do everything possible to make sure that he or she, in this case, they're only male contenders at this moment, he would probably do everything possible to make sure that he would then also be selected to run as the candidate for chancellor when we have elections in September. But
sorry to interrupt. I'm mindful of the time, and there are a couple of other questions I want to get to, especially the next one, because you spent a lot of time as a diplomat in Russia, and you know it extremely well. And of course, you've had these very important OSCE appointments because of the Ukraine crisis. And so the question is coming from David Wimsett, and he wants to know if you think that the Russland Versteher, so that means the kind of, I know you know what it means, but for our audience, the kind of a sympathy with Russia wing of the German domestic sentiment has grown stronger during these past 4 years. And does Germany, as a de facto EU leader, have a duty to continue to pursue a sort of 21st century kind of eastward-facing Ostpolitik, eastward-facing politics, so that Russia can maintain links with Europe? I mean, clearly, Putin's foreign policy tactics and view does not align with yours or most of the West. So I'd be curious to see what you think the tension is in Germany between Russia's aggressive actions and the kind of leaning into Russia because, you know, Germany, half of Germany was controlled by Russia for so many years.
Sure. Germans are acutely aware of the fact that we could not have achieved unification in 1990 if the Soviet Union had sent in the tanks or had stopped the diplomatic process. So there's a sense that we should, if possible, do our best to have a meaningful relationship with Russia, to keep the door open. During the Cold War, NATO had as its fundamental concept what we call the Harmel Report. The essence of the Harmel Report you can describe in 2 words: as much defense as you need in order to deter the enemy, and as much cooperation as we can possibly offer, right? And I think that kind of recipe sounds right to most Germans. The problem is, it will only work, this offer of cooperation, if the other side is interested. It takes 2 to tango. And at the moment, Vladimir Putin is not ready to tango. Instead, he has sent people to murder Russian emigres in Tiergarten Park, right in downtown Berlin, and we had to nurture Mr. Navalny back to health just very recently. So at the moment, we are at an all-time low in our bilateral relationship. But I think historically and politically speaking, we should always send the signal to the Russian people that we are keeping the door open. If you guys want to come back and work with the West on the basis of agreed rules, which we thought we had established in 1990 in the Charter of Paris, then we're ready, and we want arms control, and we do hope, I forgot to mention that in the beginning, there is enormous hope in Germany and in other European countries as well, that the Biden administration would send a quick signal to Russia about its willingness to renegotiate or negotiate a quick extension of what we call the New START agreement on intercontinental ballistic missiles. That would be one good sign that we're in business, and we're trying to move security forward, not only by building up our military capability, but also by diplomatic negotiation.
Thank you. That's hopefully what will happen. I know that the nuclear and armament issue is very important and big in the Biden foreign policy realm. So we've got about 4 minutes left, and I think that I wanted to just toss out a general question to you. We have, as a wrap up, is there room for hope? Is there room for optimism? What do we need to do as the West? I mean, you talked a little bit about it in the beginning, but if you have some closing adages, wisdom that we can share that will keep us thinking positively, that even though the world in great danger exists now, can we turn this around?
I think we have um, distinct, separate assignments, we in Europe and you in the United States. I hope the Biden administration can really, that is my personal wish. I've spent so many years living in the United States. I hope the Biden administration will be capable of healing, of bringing Americans together again and reduce this unfortunate degree of polarization that has grown in this country, and to reestablish American principled leadership on the basis of values, on the basis of alliance commitments, on the basis of multilateralism, on the basis of regarding Europe not as a foe, as did Donald Trump, but as a valued partner, not always an easy partner, sometimes a nasty partner, but always a partner. And we in Europe, we have our separate assignment, which is not less demanding. We need to create conditions that, and that's hard to do, that will allow the European Union to be a meaningful actor, a respected actor, not only in trade and investment, but also in terms of security. We need to be able to handle some of the security challenges in our theater ourselves. We cannot assume that each time something goes wrong in Europe, the United States will send, 500 tanks and divisions of US soldiers. I understand the American taxpayer who says, why can't these guys get their act together and do something themselves? But what we do need, and that is my concluding word, what we do need is a continued recommitment to our NATO alliance. I think that is important for Europe because we could not guarantee our own security in a nuclear world, in a situation where out of 27 member countries of the European Union, there is exactly now, after the UK has left, exactly one country, namely France, that has a nuclear capability, and the rest of us, including my own country, have to rely on the United States when it comes to nuclear or other military threats. And we want to make sure that extortion and pressure cannot work on us, applied by our adversaries. Can we guarantee that on our own? Probably not. That's why we need the continued relationship with the United States. That's why we need NATO. And that is why we need to do more in the burden sharing area in order to make Americans feel less uncomfortable about these commitments in Europe.
Well, with that word, and thank you so much, Wolfgang. This has been, I know everyone agrees, a very rich conversation, and really opens our understanding to many of the issues that we will see continuing and coming up in the next couple of years. I just want to plug your book. Here it is. But I want mine signed at some point, which you can get on Amazon.
I'll send you a signed copy, Kimberly.
Good, because I've marked this one up. And I just want to thank everybody for joining us this morning at the Pacific Council on International Policy. As always, thank you, Jerry Green and Alexander Moore, for organizing this and inviting Ambassador Ischinger to join us today. A real pleasure, and please give my warmest regards to Utah. And I know John has been on this. He hasn't put a question in the question box. Normally he does. But I know he also sends his greetings, and hope to see you guys sooner rather than later.
Well, same here, Kimberly. Thank you so much for doing this. I can't be more thankful. It's been a wonderful discussion. I enjoyed it tremendously. I hope that some people will find the book interesting. By the way, for those of you who are interested in the book, it does have the story about how, as an ambassador, I was invited to Mar-a-Lago in 2005, totally not understanding that the host, with whom I had a small irrelevant conversation about his German roots, the host would one day become the president of the United States. So there are some nice little anecdotes in the book, and I hope some of you would find them entertaining. Thanks, Kimberly. Again, this
Thank
was a
you
wonderful.
very much, Wolfgang. And
Soon. Stay healthy. Stay
thank
healthy.
you. Let's talk soon. Okay.
Bye bye.
Thank you. Thanks for all you do. All right. Take care. Bye-bye. Bye, everybody.